Threats and harassment like that have become a regular occurrence for election workers and election officials all across the United States. And like Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman, that means a lot of them just choose not to return to their jobs. The Brennan Center for Justice polled election officials across the country and found that turnover is so high that when the 2024 election comes around, more than 20% of local election officials may have to be new recruits. That's people who have never administered presidential elections before. In key swing states, the effect of these election lies and accusations of fraud was even more acute. Last year, the Boston Globe actually quantified it. In Michigan, nearly 27% of county-level election officials have left their posts. In Wisconsin, 30% are gone. In Georgia, 36% have quit. In Arizona, 37% are gone. And in Pennsylvania, 39% are no longer on the job. Almost 40% of county election officials in the state that determine the final outcome of the 2020 presidential election, almost 40% of them have quit. That is the toll taken by these lies. So thank you, Mr. Giuliani, for kind of sort of maybe admitting that you lied, but just in court to move a case along and not in real life. The damage quite clearly has been done. So how do we as a country clean up this mess? Joining me now is the Secretary of State of Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, the chief elections official for that state. Secretary Benson, thank you so much for being here. I would like to get your first, your reaction to this. I think we can call it a concession on the part of Mr. Giuliani that these claims about these two election workers were baseless.
I don't even know if I'd go so far as to say it's a concession, because of the way outside of the court documents, he continued to walk back what he said. But none of his capitulations or dancing in this moment or any other changes the reality and the history that he and others lied about an election, causing dire consequences to the lives of professional election administrators in the process. I mean, people showed up outside my home 2 days, 3 days after Mayor Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani, had showed up at our state capitol in Lansing, telling lies about our elections. Shaye and Ruby Moss, amazing women, represent the stories of so many untold election workers who have left their jobs because of these threats that come in many ways from these very loud voices and continue to do so. So the question is, will there be consequences for the violence and the threats that grew out of these lies? I certainly hope so. But we, as my colleague Gabe Sterling said, over 3 years, almost 3 years ago, this needs to stop. Also, we need to stop seeing Mike Lindell and so many others out there, including presidential candidates and U.S. senators, spreading these lies to further political gain, because it has real life consequences to the men and women whose job it is to make democracy work for everyone.
Yeah, on that note, it's not just Giuliani and Trump, right? It's not limited to an administration that's intent on clinging to power. This is now the de facto position of the Republican Party to suggest that there was fraud in the 2020 election and could be in future elections. This is the position of presidential candidates. No one is out there telling the truth. And so I wonder, given as we are on the precipice of a potential federal indictment of the former president on January 6 charges or charges to interfere with the 2020 election, do you think that can have the effect that it potentially needs to have, which is an ameliorative effect to reverse the decay, the rot that has penetrated some of these institutions in terms of public confidence? Do you think the toothpaste, for lack of a better metaphor, can be put back in the tube?
Well, I think two things will result. I mean, certainly the accountability is a really important affirmation of the truth. When we were going through all of this in the fall of 2020, I remember the days in which we were up against the federal government. The president of the United States was coming after us, it felt, and his most ardent supporters for just doing our jobs and doing nothing wrong. We couldn't help the fact that he lost a presidential election. Our job was just to make sure everyone could vote and then tell the truth. And so we always had these moments, my team, where we sort of recognized, we may lose this battle over democracy in this moment. We may lose it in the future, and that's real. But the courts are the ones that held the line and demanded truth be told. And that's why this concession today or last night is so critical. It shows that you can't lie in the court of law. You can perhaps lie outside the Four Seasons gardening arena or wherever that press conference was meant to be held, but you can't lie in a court of law. And so the more we see legal cases brought forward, pushing for the truth, whether it's criminal charges or defamation charges, that helps us get to a point where we have an official affirmation of what is fact and what is false. And the other thing I'll just mention, what I've lived through as we've seen this unfold these last 3 years, is at the same time we've seen pain in our democracy, people losing their jobs, people walking away from the work. We've also seen an influx of so many Americans on both sides of the aisle who know the truth, who know the courage that it took to defend the truth, and are standing with us, serving as election workers, volunteering as poll workers for future elections because they believe in the process. And that, in many ways, gives me hope that we can emerge from this moment with a stronger elections process than ever before.
Well, on that note, I mean, I guess, does it worry you that up to a fifth of election workers in the 2024 presidential race may be new, that they will have had no administrative experience in what is sure to be a contested election, or at least a very fraught election, given the position of one of the leading candidates?
Yes, certainly. That turnover is concerning, but it also provides us with an opportunity to recognize that over half of those election officials who lived through 2020 will be back again in 2024. And we are ready, wizened, and strengthened, determined to protect the process and train those who are coming in as new election officials to be proud of this work, to stand with the truth and the will of the people, whatever it may be. So we have kind of gone through these last few years here in Michigan, learning how to take these challenges and making them opportunities. And I think that's what you'll see, I believe, unfold in 2024 if Americans all across the country join with us and stand up to be part of the process and speak the truth and push back against the lies.
I mean, I think a lot of people appreciate the optimism of, your position, which is that people are flooding the zone, as it were. When democracy is being threatened, people aren't averting their eyes. They're coming and they're raising their hands to volunteer to help save it. On that note, in a more sort of craven chapter of strengthening democracy, the Republican Party appears to understand that it is not good electoral politics to turn people off of early voting, mail-in voting, absentee balloting, and the RNC is launching a new campaign featuring Donald Trump, of all people, urging Republicans to vote early. That's not the same thing as Donald Trump saying, look, the 2020 election wasn't stolen, but it is something. And I guess I wonder, A, what you make of that, and B, if you're at all optimistic that Donald Trump somehow can encourage people to come back home again to the institutions that we've set up that are thus far unparalleled in terms of their integrity.
Well, look, I want everyone everywhere to take advantage of all the options they have to vote in their states and their communities. Look at the one that is open and most convenient for you, and no matter where you live or who you vote for, participate in democracy. And as far as the former president and others now embracing early voting, great. I'd like to see him also talk about how secure it is, how secure ballot drop boxes are, how we can trust the results of the election. Let's take that one step further. So you're not just endorsing the process, but overriding the past lies by telling the truth about the security of our elections and the security of early voting and the reliability of our machines and the results in a paper ballot election. If we see that, then I'll have more cause for optimism. But also we have to remember that it's neighbors and everyday citizens that can be the arbiters of truth and the truth tellers in their communities, even if we don't get that from candidates and politicians. So it's incumbent again upon all of us to learn the facts and truth about our elections and spread that to our neighbors, to our fellow parishioners, to our colleagues all around the country. And if we can do that as citizens, then we can fight back against the lies together.
Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, it's so great to get a view from the state, and especially the state that's been soothed through so much as it concerns the 2020 election. Thanks greatly for your time tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.